Physics, Part 1. Newton's first law of motion, which means law of inertia. Objectives: apply Newton's first law to obtain quantitative and qualitative conclusions about the contact and non-contact forces acting in a body in equilibrium. So, may two types of force, which is the contact force and the non-contact force. Ang ilang kalahian, ang contact force are objects that are physically touching. So, naay touching nga nahitabo, naay interaction nga nahitabo. Example ana kay ang normal contact force or the reaction force. So, example diha kay ang bola nga bugat ug sa table. So, nasa just imabaw nga table, dinaay weight nga nahitabo ang kabugaton tahay sa bola og equal pod and opposite force nga naa sa table. Then, while ang non-contact force is don't require the objects to be touching. So, while interaction, wala po'y touching nga nahitabo sa duha ka objects. Example kay ang gravitational, ang magnetic, og ang electrostatic, which is the field of influence ang tawag anang tulo. Laing tawag sa contact forces with examples. Contact forces interactions between objects that touch. Example ni kay applied force, spring force, drag force, frictional force, og kaning gitawag nga normal force. While ang non-contact forces nag-attract siya or repel even from a distance. So like example, magnetic force, electric force, o gravitational force. So, lang definition sa contact force, it involves a force between two objects in contact. And for example, kay friction between your feet and the ground can be present. While non-contact force involves a force between objects not touching. You can't see anything physically touching, but there is still an attraction or repulsion. For example, magnetic forces between two magnets can happen when the magnets are near but not touching. So karon, ahong ka-research unsa man gajud what is the qualitative and quantitative definition of force. So kay naglasi man ta atong topic karon kay first law of Newton's kay the qualitative definition of force and the basis of Newton's first law of motion is as follows. Force is that external cause which can move a stationary object or when can change the state of motion of a moving object. Newton's second law of motion gives quantitative definition of force. So, meaning, ang para sa Newton's first law of motion kay qualitative definition of force sila nagbase, dili quantitative. Kay nga naman, kay ang quantitative definition of force kay para na siya sa Newton's second law of motion. Kay nag-talk about numbers man na siya tahay. So, muna quantitative ang sa second law. Then, ang qualitative is more about the rhythm, more about kay nga na. Because Newton's first law or law of inertia is nothing but the first law of Newton's, and it gives a qualitative definition of force. Because force must push, pull, and make objects move and bring them into motion also. Hence, it is qualitative definition of force. So, napala ang meaning ano qualitative man ang gitawag natong first law of Newton's. So, qualitative analysis assists the technical quality of the movement. So, technical quality of the movement man. So, like rhythm o ang iyang posture. Whereas, quantitative techniques assess the movement using the numbers like the angles, distance, speed, o force. Kay inertia man itong iklasihan, so, qualitative jud ang iyang movement. Who is Isaac Newton? Isaac Newton, as any scientist is supposed to be, was a very curious man who would not take things around him for a given and started wondering and investigating what makes objects move. Sir Isaac Newton was a physicist and mathematician who developed the principles of modern physics, including laws of motion, and is credited as one of the great minds of the 70th century scientific revolution. A force in physics is a measure of the interaction of objects. A force makes an object change its speed, accelerate, or even make an object stop and its movement direction. Meaning, ang force kuno kay usa na sadya ka measurement of the interaction of objects. Nga naghimo sa mga object para ma-change ang ilang speed. So, this law is also called the law of inertia. So, ato na i-familiarize nga ang laing tawag sa Newton's first law of motion kay law of inertia. Nga ng law of inertia man? Unsan din ang inertia? Inertia in physics is an ability of an object to remain inactive or stable. So, from the word nga object to remain inactive or stable, so dili gyud siya maluhag. So, like, mo ba siya stable kasi siya sa usa ka butang like kanang bola nga nasa ibabaw sa table ja din siya maluhag, dili siya mabut nga nag-force nga para maluhag siya. So moto ang tawag sa usa ka butang nga stable kasi siya sa iyang sitwasyon kay mo na ang inertia. If things did not have this tendency, our world would collapse into chaos. Just imagine the furniture in your bedroom sporadically moving by itself. It would be impossible or even dangerous to stay in such a space for a long time. So, like daghang example sa law of inertia. First, kayang jeepney ag yang mga pasahero. So, kung example diha ang jeepney driver kay mukalit kag hunong, so move forward tahay ang kaning mga pasahero, pero nag-remain gyapon sila nga naa sa ilang gilingkuran. Then na inertia nga nahitabo. Second is ang bowling ball nga wala gilabdan, so nag-remain ra siya sa iyang posisyon. Then ikaduha po is kaning ping-pong ball. Nag-remain gyapon siya because of its mass, so kabugaton. Then ang law of inertia lain na pod kay kaning driver nga mikalit lamang pud og brake. So naglingkod si Judge na kahuman kay si Judge brake ja. Naama si Jay sige tawag ani and because of the seat belt di ay kay nahitabo kay mo si Judge na move forward ang iyang lawas. Pero because of the seatbelt, tabang sa seatbelt di ay kay nag-remain gyapon siya nga nakalingkod. Then ang fourth example kay ang TV. Sa kabugaton ni siya, so kung di mo siya luhagon, dili siya mulakaw, dili siya mahagbong, inana. Pero kung gunitan tayo siya sa mga owner tayo sa TV, gunitan siya sa duha ka tao, syempre maluhag na noon siya kay imo man siya gigunitan, gigamitan man nimo siya og puwersa. So now, let us examine the forces acting on the block. The only forces acting on the block are the force of gravity and the normal reaction by the surface. So muni siya. Mutahin ni siya acting on the block. Then balik ko na to. There is no force acting on it in the horizontal direction, since the forces in the vertical direction are equal to each other in magnitude. They cancel each other out, and hence there is no external force on the block. Since this block is at rest, we can say that it confirms Newton's first law of motion. Nanawon nga. So muna force of gravity, padungbos. So, ang force is nasa kilid, like kanang sa block. Then, ang normal reaction kay ang kaning position or gibutangan sa block. A constant force applied in horizontal direction. Natahay force din na na-apply. So, there are two conditions on which the first law of motion is dependent. Objects at rest. When an object is at rest, kung object kuno kay nako na sa at rest na position, dili maluhag, velocity is equal to 0 and acceleration A is equal to 0. So R 0. Therefore, the object continues to be at rest. Kaya pala. So alam niyo na. Char. Second is objects in motion. When an object is in motion, velocity is not equal to 0. Dili jud ko na equal ang velocity sa 0. So, V is not equal to 0 kay ang object kay naamay in motion. While acceleration, A is equal to 0 is equal to 0. Therefore, the object will continue to be in motion with constant velocity and in the same direction. So, example, ana, ka-example in daily life. Wearing a seatbelt in a car. So, pakita tayo sa usa ka example to ganina. Wearing a seatbelt in a car while driving is an example of Newton first law of motion. If an accident occurs or brakes are applied to the car suddenly, the body will tend to continue its inertia and move forward. O, sakto diba ang resulta ganina nga move forward tahay pero nag-continue gyapon siyang inertia, which is stable, remains at rest, probably proving fatal. To prevent such accidents, seatbelts are used, stopping your body from moving forward in inertia and avoiding danger. So, karon din natin sa applying Newton's law. Using Newton's first law, when forces are in equilibrium, a body in equilibrium when it is at rest or moving with constant velocity in an inertial frame of reference. Part 2 to be continued.